Nobody wants a big girl, her ex mocked. Then, a Korean Mafia boss claimed her. The shrimp were overcooked. Ava noticed it the second the server passed with the tray. She noticed it the way she noticed everything at events, automatically, professionally, the part of her brain that ran Eclipse events never fully clocking out. Not even when she was technically there as someone's date. She set her glass down and slipped away to find water. That small decision, that one small, unremarkable decision, changed everything. She heard Brandon before she saw him. His voice was low, careful, the voice he used when he was managing something. She'd heard it enough times to recognize it the way you recognize weather before it fully arrives. "Look, I know how it seems," he was saying. She slowed. "Ellis, the woman is stunning." A voice she didn't recognize. "I genuinely don't understand why you keep her at a distance." Silence. The particular kind of silence that fills itself. Then Brandon quieter. "Nobody wants a big girl at this level, Marcus. Image matters." Ava stopped walking. The water glass in her hand felt suddenly very, very heavy. She'd heard versions of this her entire life. Beautiful for a big girl. Unstoppable if you lost a little weight. Any man would be lucky, but that word. Always that word. But she'd learned to smile through it, to leave the condition on the floor where it belonged and just take the compliment home. But this was Brandon. The man who held her hand through her mother's health scare, who said she was the most impressive person he'd ever met, who she'd spent 2 years building something real with. Or at least, she'd thought it was real. She turned slowly. He hadn't seen her yet. He was still facing away, adjusting his cufflinks with the focused energy of a man who had just said something he fully believed. When he turned and found her standing there, the blood left his face. Instantly. "Ava, don't." Her voice was quiet, completely steady. That surprised even her. "Don't explain it. Don't apologize for it right now. I heard exactly what you said." "I was just... people in this industry." "Brandon." She said his name like a full stop. Like punctuation at the end of a sentence she was done writing. "I'm going to leave now, and I need you to not follow me." She set the water glass down on the nearest surface, picked up her silver clutch, and walked toward the exit with her spine perfectly straight and her chin level. She would not cry here. She'd decided that before she'd even finished turning around. What she didn't see as she moved through the crowd was the man in the black pinstripe suit who'd been standing close enough to hear everything. Kang Ji-Hoon had come to the gala because his family's foundation was one of the evening's major sponsors. He'd stepped toward the alcove to handle a security matter quietly. He'd overheard the exchange by pure accident. He watched her walk away and felt something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with business. He looked once at the man still standing in the alcove, straightening his jacket like he hadn't just detonated something, and then Ji Hune handed his untouched champagne to a passing server and walked away. He'd learned a long time ago that the most dangerous thing he could do in a public space was let his face reflect what he was actually thinking. Right now, what he was thinking was not appropriate for a charity gala. Ava made it to the car before the first tear fell. Just one. She wiped it away immediately, annoyed at it, and sat in the back of the ride share staring at the Chicago skyline blurring past the window. 2 years. She'd given Brandon 2 years. Holidays and inside jokes and long phone calls and showing up for him in every way she knew how. She'd been in his corner through 3 job changes, a family fallout, the kind of 2 a.m. anxieties people only share with people they fully trust, and he'd been ashamed of her body at a cocktail party. She almost laughed. Almost. Her phone buzzed. "Aunt Denise, how's the fancy party?" Ava stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Coming home early, put the kettle on." 3 dots appeared immediately, then, "Already on, get here." That was the thing about Denise Robinson. She never asked unnecessary questions in a crisis. She just turned the kettle on. Ava showed up at her aunt's door 20 minutes later, gown and all, and Denise opened it, looked her up and down once and said, "You look gorgeous. What did he do?" Not a question. They sat at the kitchen table until midnight, tea going cold, Denise listening with the focused attention of someone who understood that people don't need advice first. They need to be heard completely before a single word of wisdom enters the room. When Ava finally went quiet, Denise wrapped both hands around her mug and said, "The people who deserve access to you should never require you to shrink first. That's not love, baby. That's management." Ava nodded slowly. "I know. I think I've known for a while." "What are you going to do?" Ava picked up her cold tea and took a sip anyway. "I'm going to go home, I'm going to sleep, and tomorrow I'm going to show up to work and be so ridiculously excellent at my job that I don't have room to fall apart." Denise smiled. "That's my girl." And that's exactly what she did. Except, here's the part nobody saw. On the drive home, something quietly shifted inside her. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a rule written somewhere underneath everything else. Never again. Never let yourself fall for someone whose world is bigger than yours. Never hand that kind of power to someone who could use it against you. She didn't even notice she'd made the rule. But she had. And it was going to complicate everything. If you're already here for Ava, just know, this story is about to test her in ways she did not see coming. Keep watching, because the next part changes everything. The following weeks looked like productivity from the outside. Inside, they looked like Ava Robinson aggressively channeling Heartbreak into the most ambitious contract Eclipse Events had ever landed. The Korean American Cultural Harmony Foundation had reached out 3 days after the gala. 2-day community celebration, Korean heritage, cross-cultural connection, over 1,000 expected guests, catering, logistics, entertainment, cultural consultation, all of it. The kind of contract that would have intimidated her 2 years ago. Right now, it felt like exactly what she needed. She told herself one thing going in: keep it professional. Don't get attached to the clients. Do the work. Cash the check. Go home. Her coordinator, Maya, had said when the contract came in, "Kang Foundation, Ava. Do you know who the Kangs are?" "I'll find out," Ava said. Maya had given her a look, the kind that meant you're going to find out more than you expected. She had no idea what was walking through that conference room door. The first planning meeting was on the 42nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of Lake Michigan that Ava clocked immediately as something she would have used completely differently if she'd designed the room. She arrived 7 minutes early, reviewed her notes, mentally rehearsed her opening remarks. Then the door opened, and the energy in the room changed. She felt it before she saw it, the way the 2 staff members who'd been chatting suddenly straightened, the way the assistant set down her pen. Kang Ji-Hoon walked in like a man who'd stopped trying to take up less space a long time ago. Not arrogantly, just completely, uncomplicatedly present. Dark suit, no tie. The kind of stillness that comes from someone who's never in a hurry because the world has already arranged itself to wait for them. She recognized him from the gala. She hadn't known who he was that night, just a face in the crowd before everything went sideways. Now, having done her research on the foundation's leadership, she knew exactly what she was looking at. Power. Old family kind. Earned through loyalty kind. The Kang family had been in Los Angeles for 3 generations. On paper, private security, real estate, cultural philanthropy. In practice, people talked. Chicago's Korean business community spoke about them in the particular tone reserved for families you respected completely and questioned quietly. Someone had called them the Korean Mafia in a profile years ago. The label stuck the way unfair things sometimes do, not because it was fully accurate, but because it wasn't fully wrong either. There were stories, favors that couldn't be traced, problems that disappeared, loyalty that ran so deep it looked, from the outside, like something more complicated than loyalty. Ava had read 3 different accounts of the Kang family before this meeting. All 3 told slightly different stories. All 3 agreed on one thing. When Ji Hune Kang gave his word, the matter was settled. Full stop. She kept her face professionally neutral. Stood, extended her hand. Ava Robinson, Eclipse Events. He shook it, firm, brief, no performance. Ji Hune Kang. He glanced at the portfolio spread across the table. You came prepared. I always come prepared, she said. Something very small shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, just acknowledgement. Later, in the elevator going down, one of the foundation's junior staff leaned toward Ava's coordinator and said, barely above a whisper, she didn't flinch at all when he walked in. The coordinator whispered back, should she have? A pause. Most people do. Rule 1, Ava reminded herself, replaying that exchange in her head later that night. Don't get attached. The meeting ran 90 minutes. She presented her concept, a design framework that wove Korean cultural elements into the physical space without reducing them to decoration. A food program developed with Korean American chefs from the actual community, and a Day 2 storytelling segment inviting cross-cultural exchange between Korean and African American attendees. She'd done real research, talked to community members, thought about it seriously. When she finished, there was a pause. One of the staff members said something in Korean to Ji Hune. He replied without looking up from the proposal, then looked at Ava. The storytelling segment, he said. That wasn't in the brief. No, she agreed. It wasn't, but the brief was about celebration, and I think real celebration requires people to actually see each other, not just share space. A beat. We'll include it. His staff member looked mildly surprised. Ava got the sense that phrase didn't leave his mouth casually. Okay, she thought, gathering her materials. Impressive. Still. Professional relationship. That's all this is. She told herself that very firmly. She'd be telling herself that for the next 3 weeks. 6 weeks of planning, 14 follow-up meetings, and somewhere around week 3, she stopped pretending she wasn't paying attention to him. It happened gradually, the way you notice weather changing, not in one dramatic shift, but in small details that accumulate until suddenly the sky looks completely different. He always remembered the names of her staff, even the junior coordinator she'd brought to only one meeting. He arrived before his own team. Every time. When a vendor called mid-meeting and she stepped away to handle it, he waited without pulling out his phone to fill the silence. Just waited, like her return was worth waiting for, and sometimes she caught him watching her work, not intrusively, just curiously, like she was something he was still trying to figure out and genuinely finding the process interesting. Stop noticing things, she told herself. She kept noticing things. Around week 4, they ended up alone in the planning space. It happened naturally, a vendor call that ran long, another question, then another. And suddenly, it was 40 minutes later, and everyone else had filtered out and neither of them had moved toward the door. He was standing beside her over the cultural centerpiece layout when she said, without entirely planning to, "Can I ask you something that isn't about the event?" He looked at her. "Yes." People talk about you like you're untouchable, but you treat the catering staff better than most executives treat their own assistants." She held his gaze. Which version is actually true? He considered this seriously. No deflection, no performance of humility. "Probably both," he said, "depending on what someone needs from me." "What do people usually need from you?" "Something. Just that. Everyone who comes near me needs something: resources, protection, access, favors. It's been that way long enough that I've stopped being surprised by it." She turned to look at him properly. "Does that bother you?" "A beat. It used to. What changed?" He was quiet for a moment, and then, carefully, like someone lifting the edge of something they didn't lift often. "My grandmother died 6 years ago. She was the person in my family who reminded us that loyalty and duty weren't the same thing as living. She used to say, 'You can honor your family and still choose your own life. Those two things don't have to be enemies.'" He paused. "When she passed, I realized I'd been waiting for her permission to actually do that, and now there was no one left to give it to me." Ava was very still. "So, what did you do?" "I kept working," he said simply, "because I didn't know what else to do." He picked up a layout marker, set it down differently. "I'm still figuring out what else to do." She understood that more than she wanted to admit. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "She sounds like she was someone worth missing." "She was the reason I know how to see people." He glanced at her sideways. "She taught me that, which is how I know you smile when you're covering something." Ava blinked. "Excuse me?" "You smile bigger when something's bothering you, not smaller. I've noticed it." He wasn't challenging her, just stating it. Carefully. She opened her mouth, closed it. "That's very observant," she said finally. "Occupational habit," he said. And the corner of his mouth moved again, that almost smile. Her phone buzzed with a vendor confirmation, and the moment folded back into the logistics, and they both let it, because neither of them knew what to do with what had just happened. But she drove home, replaying it for longer than was strictly reasonable, and underneath the replaying, underneath the warmth of it, that rule she'd written herself hummed like a warning light. "His world is enormous. Don't." Brandon called on a Tuesday evening while she was reorganizing her spice rack. His name sat on her screen for 8 full seconds. She answered. "Hi," he said. "Hi?" A long pause. She could hear him composing himself. Brandon had always needed a moment before difficult conversations. She used to find that endearing. Right now, it just made her tired. "I've been trying to figure out how to say this properly," he started. "Say it however it comes out," she said. "I'm not grading you." He exhaled. "I was wrong. What I said, how I said it was wrong and cruel, and I think part of me knew that before I even finished saying it. But you said it. I said it." Silence stretched. "I love you, Ava. I need you to know that's real." She leaned against the counter and stared at the far wall. The complicated thing, the thing she hadn't entirely admitted even to Denise, was that she believed him. She genuinely believed Brandon loved her. She also knew that love wasn't the same thing as courage, that a man could love someone completely and still choose his reputation over them in a room full of watching eyes. "I believe you," she said quietly. "But Brandon, were you ever proud of me? Not of my work, not of my company. Of me just standing next to you in a room. Were you ever just proud?" The pause that followed was the most honest thing he'd ever given her. That silence was the only answer she needed. "I thought so," she said softly. Not bitterly, just clearly. "Ava, I'm not angry at you. I need you to hear that. I'm genuinely not angry. I'm just done." She put the smoked paprika back on the shelf. I hope you figure out why someone else's opinion was worth more to you than someone who loved you. She hung up gently, stood in her kitchen, very still, and felt something settle in her chest that felt less like grief and more like resolution. Ji Hune showed up at her office. He'd texted first, which she'd note later was more consideration than most people bothered with. He was in a simpler outfit than usual, dark trousers, untucked shirt. No entourage, just him and the quiet that seemed to follow him everywhere like a well-trained shadow. "I was in the area," he said when her assistant showed him through. She looked up from her laptop. "You're never just in an area. You're always somewhere deliberately." He sat down across from her desk, without being invited, which should have been irritating. "True. I had a meeting 2 blocks away. I came to see if you'd eaten lunch." She stared at him. "It's 2:30, she said. "I know. I work through lunch sometimes." "I know that too." She opened her mouth, closed it, then said, "There's a Korean place 3 blocks south. One of your vendors recommended it. I've been meaning to try it." Something warm moved through his expression. "Good," he said. "Let's go." Lunch turned into 2 hours. The restaurant was small and family-run, and the Himmel pageant arrived looking exactly like someone's grandmother had made it with genuine feeling, which Ava told the owner directly. And the owner laughed and said something to Ji Hune in Korean that made him actually dip his head like he was embarrassed. "What did she say?" Ava asked. "She said I should bring you back," he said, eyes on his bowl. Ava smiled at her soup. They talked for a long time. Not about the event, about families, about people who shaped them. He told her about his younger sister Soo Min, who called every Sunday with the purpose of telling him he worked too much. She told him about Denise, about what Denise said to her the night everything fell apart. "She sounds formidable," he said. She'd take that as a compliment. Ava paused, then said something she hadn't planned to. "She told me the people who deserve access to you should never require you to shrink first." She turned her water glass slowly. "I think about that a lot lately." He was quiet for a moment. "She's right. She always is." He looked at her across the table, and she let herself look back. Properly this time. Not cataloging, just seeing. There was something in his face that looked like recognition. Like 2 people who'd been moving through different versions of the same loneliness and suddenly found themselves at the same table. "Ava!" He said her name like it was a complete sentence. "Ji Hune." She said his the same way. He smiled then. A real one, unexpected and unguarded, and it changed his entire face, made him look younger, made him look like someone who'd forgotten, temporarily, that he was supposed to be formidable. She felt something shift in the vicinity of her sternum, and immediately, that warning light came on. His world is enormous. The rule, her rule. He's exactly the kind of man you said you'd never do this with again. Someone who could make you feel small just by existing at a higher altitude. Don't! She smiled back at him and buried the feeling under professionalism like it was a fire she was trying to smother before it caught. She started pulling back the next week. Not dramatically. She didn't cancel meetings or send clipped replies. She just maintained a careful professional distance with the focus of someone building a very deliberate wall. The problem was, Ji Hune noticed, he didn't push. He didn't show up at her office again or text asking what was wrong. He just adjusted, gave her exactly the space she was creating without making her feel punished for needing it, which paradoxically made the wall harder to maintain. Because the thing she'd been most afraid of was a man who'd crowd her, who'd make her feel like she owed him access, who'd make the space between them feel like her fault. He was doing the exact opposite, and she didn't know what to do with that. Okay, I need you to drop a comment right now because this internal battle Ava is having. This is what nobody talks about, when the fear is louder than the feeling. You know exactly what I mean. It was Sumin who cracked it open. Ji Hoon's younger sister had extended her Chicago visit, officially for foundation business, unofficially because she was wildly invested in how this particular situation resolved, and she had absolutely no interest in being subtle about it. She introduced herself to Ava with the energy of someone who'd already decided they were going to be friends and was simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up. "He doesn't do this," she said quietly, while Ji Hune was across the room talking to the venue manager. "Let people in. Make actual friends. He thinks he seems normal, but I've known him 34 years. This is not his normal." Ava kept her eyes on the floor plan. "We're colleagues." "Okay," Sumin said in the tone of someone who found that genuinely hilarious. "We are. He called me after your lunch and described your laugh for 4 minutes. Ava looked up. Sumin smiled with the satisfied energy of someone who'd just played a perfect card. "He's terrified of saying the wrong thing to you," she said, softer now. "Because you matter, and he's not used to things mattering like this." She paused. "Also, and I say this as someone who loves him, he's been hiding behind duty and responsibility since our grandmother died. She was the one who kept nudging him toward actually living his life, and when she went," she shrugged, "he stopped letting himself want things, just quietly stopped." Ava absorbed that. Across the room, Ji Hoon glanced over, found Ava looking at him. Something passed between them, not a conversation, just a recognition. The kind that doesn't need words because words would only slow it down. He walked over. Sumin immediately became very interested in her phone. "Everything all right?" he asked Ava. "Fine," she said. Then, quieter. "We should talk, after the event." He nodded once. After the event. And that was enough. It was enough to hold on to. The day of the event was controlled chaos, wearing a formal dress. Ava was everywhere at once. Vendor setups at 6 in the morning, walking the space with her coordinator team, final reviews of the program materials with community advisors. By the time guests started arriving, everything was exactly what she designed it to be. Korean traditional lanterns alongside warm Edison lighting, food stations that represented both cultures without flattening either, and the storytelling installation, the one she'd proposed in that very first meeting, drawing people in from the moment the doors opened. A series of listening stations where Korean American and African American community members had recorded short stories about what belonging felt like. She watched a woman in her 70s sit down at one of the stations, put on headphones, and close her eyes, and felt something press warmly against the inside of her chest. Ji Hoon found her near the end of the first evening, standing at the edge of the room, watching the crowd settle from event into something that felt more like gathering, which was exactly what she'd wanted. "You built something real," he said, coming to stand beside her. She looked out at the room. "I tried to." "You did." A pause. "My grandmother would have loved this, the storytelling piece especially. She would have sat at every single station." Ava looked at him. "That's why I included it," she said quietly. "Not for her specifically, but for everyone's grandmother, everyone who holds a story that younger people are running too fast to hear." He was very still for a moment. Then, "How did you know to care about that?" "Because someone cared enough to teach me to." She met his eyes. "Same way you know how to see people." He held her gaze, and something in him, some careful, disciplined thing he'd been maintaining for a very long time, quietly loosened. "Ava." He said her name the way he always did, like it was a whole sentence. "I need to say something." She waited. "I know what happened at that gala," he said. "I was nearby. I heard what he said to you." She went still. "What?" I wasn't trying to listen. I was handling something near the alcove. I heard everything. His voice was measured, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. And what I thought when I heard it wasn't about you. It was about him. Because only a man who's afraid of his own limitations looks at someone extraordinary and calls it a liability. Her throat tightened. I've never once, he continued, not for a single moment since we met, thought about what standing next to you costs me. I've only ever thought about what it would cost me not to. The noise of the room felt very far away. She searched his face for the qualifier, for the fine print, for the but. She found nothing, just steadiness, just certainty. Your world is enormous, she said finally, and the last time I loved someone whose world felt bigger than mine. He made you feel like a compromise, Ji Hune said quietly. She looked at him. Yes, I understand that fear. I do. He held her gaze, unblinking. But I want you to hear me when I say, I'm not asking you to fit into my world, Ava. I'm asking if you'd be willing to build something new with me, something that belongs to both of us. A long moment passed. That rule she'd written herself, the one she'd carried for months like a shield, didn't disappear, but it loosened. Just enough. Okay, she said. He raised an eyebrow slightly. Okay, she said again, and the corner of her mouth moved in a way she couldn't suppress. That unguarded smile appeared on his face before he could arrange it into anything more composed, and Ava Robinson let herself stay in the warmth of it, without bracing, without waiting for the but. The month that followed looked like a beginning. Real dinners, not meetings, conversations that ran past midnight. Ji Hune meeting Denise, who assessed him in under 4 minutes and announced to the room, "He has good manners and good shoulders. I approve," before returning to her potato salad, while Sue Min, who had extended her Chicago visit indefinitely at this point, looked at Ava with the expression of someone whose investment had officially paid off. Ji Hoon moved through Ava's family with the same grounded ease he brought everywhere, helping Denise carry dishes without being asked, letting Ava's youngest cousin explain the entire plot of a video game with genuine attention, eating 3 plates of food and telling Denise the collard greens were the best thing he'd consumed in recent memory, which made Denise immediately pack him a container to take home. At some point during the evening, Ava found herself standing in the kitchen doorway, watching him sit on the back porch with her Uncle Roy. Both of them talking quietly about something she couldn't hear, and she felt something she hadn't expected. Safe. Not in the relieved that nothing bad is happening way. In the deep, settled, this is where I'm supposed to be way she'd been quietly looking for her entire adult life without quite having the language for it. Denise appeared at her shoulder with 2 glasses of iced tea and said nothing. Just handed her a glass and stood beside her. After a moment, Ava said quietly, "He makes everything feel like it could be okay." Denise sipped her tea. That man is about as simple as international tax law, but the way he makes you feel, that part is simple. She paused. Don't confuse the two. Ava looked at her. Denise looked back with the expression of someone who'd been depositing wisdom into Ava's life for 34 years and was fully prepared to continue indefinitely. Go outside, Denise said. Stop watching your life from the doorway. Ava went outside. She sat beside Ji Hoon on the porch steps, and Uncle Roy politely remembered something he needed from inside, and disappeared with the skill of a man who'd been married 40 years and understood timing. The Chicago evening was warm and soft. They sat close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and neither of them adjusted the distance. Your family is extraordinary, he said. They're a lot, she said. Both things are true. She smiled. After a moment, he said, I keep thinking about what you said at the event, about building something that belongs to both of us. She looked at him. "My grandmother used to say that duty is what you owe your family," he continued, "but joy is what you owe yourself. She said I'd know when I'd found both in the same place." He paused. "I think she was right." Ava looked at him for a long, long time. "I made myself a rule," she said quietly. "After Brandon, I told myself, never fall for someone whose world is bigger than yours. Never give that kind of power to someone again. And you're the exact kind of man that rule was designed for." He was very still. "But I think," she exhaled, "I think I made that rule to protect myself from the wrong thing. I was trying to protect myself from being made small, but you've never once made me feel small." She looked at him. "You're the first person in a long time who's made me feel like exactly enough." Ji Hune reached over slowly and covered her hand with his. No grand gesture, no speech. Just that. And it was the most certain thing she'd felt in years. This story has lived in a lot of people's hearts for a long time. If this is yours, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because the ending, it's everything. 3 months later, a charity function in downtown Chicago. Black tie, chandelier light, the kind of room that smells like money and carefully managed impressions. Brandon Ellis arrived with 2 colleagues, straightened his jacket in the lobby mirror out of habit, and walked into the ballroom feeling like he finally had things back under control. He'd been promoted. The partnership had come through. The image he'd worked so hard to maintain was intact. He was fine. He kept telling himself that. He was about 40 minutes in when he saw her. Ava was across the room in a deep burgundy gown, laughing at something. A full, unguarded laugh, the kind she always tried to partially contain in professional spaces. But tonight, she wasn't containing anything. She was lit up, completely herself. The most magnetic person in the room without appearing to try. And standing beside her, close, unhurried, with the ease of a man who was exactly where he intended to be, was Ji Hune Kang. Brandon knew who he was. Everyone in that room knew who he was. What Brandon hadn't expected was what he watched happen next. Ji Hune turned to greet a couple approaching them, older, clearly prominent, and without a pause, without a flicker of hesitation, without a single adjustment to his expression, he placed his hand at Ava's back and said, simply, warmly, completely, "I'd like you to meet Ava Robinson." That was it. No qualifier, no careful positioning, no, "this is my colleague," or "we're just," or any of the 1,000 small linguistic retreats Brandon had trained himself to make without even noticing. Just her name, said like it was a privilege to say it. The couple greeted her. She greeted them back, warm, assured, completely at ease. Ji Hune looked at her once while the others were talking with an expression Brandon couldn't name at first. And then he could. Pride. Uncomplicated, unperformed, unashamed pride. Brandon stood across the ballroom holding a drink he'd forgotten he was holding, and something landed in him, not jealousy exactly. Heavier than that, more honest. She wasn't hard to love publicly. The thought arrived clearly, the way truths arrive when you've been avoiding them long enough. She was never the problem. I was afraid of what it cost me to choose her openly, and I called that her limitation. He set his drink down on the nearest surface. The evening continued around him. Music played, people laughed. The room went on, doing what rooms like this always did. And Brandon Ellis stood very still in the middle of it, understanding for the first time, with the full, uncomfortable clarity of a man who'd gotten exactly what he wanted and lost exactly what mattered, that he had made the worst trade of his life, not because Ava had ended up with someone else, but because he'd looked at someone extraordinary and chose his reputation instead. Ava didn't see Brandon that night. She wasn't looking for him. She was too busy being exactly where she was. At some point during the evening, a server passed with a tray of appetizers. Ava glanced down at it and laughed, quietly to herself, just once. Ji Hune looked over. What? Nothing. She was still smiling. They have shrimp. He waited. Overcooked shrimp, she said. Changed my life. He looked at the tray, then at her, putting it together slowly. You went to get water because the shrimp were overcooked at the first gala. And that walk across the room is the reason I was standing in the right place at the wrong moment. She shook her head. Overcooked shrimp. That's the whole story. Ji Hoon looked at the tray for a long moment. Then he flagged the server down, took one, tasted it, and said completely seriously, "These are also overcooked." Ava laughed so hard she had to cover her mouth. He watched her with that expression. Wonder. The unguarded kind. "I'm going to send the Foundation's caterer your contact information," he said. "Please do," she said, still laughing. Later, much later, she caught her reflection in the wide mirror near the ballroom exit. Same woman, same body, same smile. Nothing about her had changed externally. Everything had changed internally. She thought about the woman who'd stood in a ballroom 8 months ago and heard something cruel said about her body like it was simply fact. Who'd walked away without breaking, who'd broken quietly in the back of a rideshare, who'd held herself together so thoroughly that most people around her never saw the fracture. She thought about the rules she'd made herself, the wall, the careful, disciplined self-protection that had almost kept out the exact thing she needed. She thought about Denise at the kitchen table. Stop watching your life from the doorway. She'd stopped. Ji Hoon appeared beside her, following her gaze to the mirror. He looked at their reflection together, then at her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She considered the question seriously. Then, "I used to think being chosen would heal me," she said. "But I think what actually happened is I healed myself first, and then I could finally recognize the people who'd been choosing me all along." He looked at her the way he always looked at her, with wonder, the unguarded kind. "Your grandmother would have liked how you turned out," she said. "I think about that sometimes." "She would have loved you," he said, no hesitation. "And she would have told me, loudly, in front of everyone, that I'd better not be an idiot about it." Ava laughed, the full kind, the uncontained kind, and Ji Hoon smiled like a man who'd finally figured out what he owed himself. Not duty, not distance, not the careful management of everything that might cost him something. Joy. The everyday, uncomplicated. This is enough, and it is also everything kind. He held out his hand. She took it. And Ava Robinson, 34 years old, owner of Eclipse Events, daughter, niece, friend, an extraordinarily competent human being, walked back into the room fully herself, not smaller, not adjusted, not braced for the butt, just her. Completely, finally, and it turned out that was always enough. It was everything. If you made it to the end, thanks for watching. I love you all.